All right, cool. Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. First of all, thanks to Parity for putting this event together. My name is Francisco, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the CEO of Moondance Labs, the company responsible for building the Tansi network, which is what I'll be speaking about today. And for the past several years, I was actually part of the core Moonbeam team working specifically on growth. So throughout that time building out Moonbeam, we had a lot of valuable learnings in terms of what it actually meant to build using Substrate and within the Polkadot ecosystem. And in large part, all those learnings drove and kind of initiated the initiative for Tansi. Tansi in itself is going to be a parachain on Polkadot that is designed to make it significantly easier for developers to build their own chains within Polkadot. Hence the title, A Protocol to Radically Accelerate Adoption on Polkadot, since we've just come to find that Polkadot has a lot of room for improvements to simplify and improve the developer experience. So yeah, we can get started. So really, the whole premise for Tansi centers itself around the fact that the app chain space has been growing significantly in the past couple of years. In large part, that growth has been led by Cosmos and Polkadot, right? They were kind of the pioneers within this app chain thesis. They've been building out architecture around app chains for the last 7 years. The Cosmos SDK and Substrate have made it significantly easier to build chains. But what we find interesting is that in the past 24 months or so, there's been a lot of competition entering the space. So there's Avalanche subnets, there's Polygon supernets, there's app-specific rollups on Ethereum mainnet. And for us, this is clear validation that the app chain space is going to continue to grow in the years to come. So the question is why, right? Like what is driving the growth within the app chain space? And honestly, we have our own point of view, of course, from having built Moonbeam. We had clear motivations as to why we needed to build a chain to build an Ethereum environment on Polkadot. So we had a very strong point of view around this, but we really wanted to do our homework and go out and speak to dozens of teams across not only the Polkadot ecosystem, but Cosmos as well and Avalanche. And after having dozens of conversations, patterns start to emerge in terms of what is motivating developers to build their own chains. The first one is really around customization, right? There's certain use cases that just require a higher degree of customization than what a shared EVM has to offer. And yeah, there's a lot of examples in this area. And I know this is like a Polkadot crowd, so I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. But there's all the parachain teams here today, had a clear rationale as to why they wanted to build a parachain, right? At Moonbeam, we wanted to create an Ethereum environment. There's other parachains like Frequency, for example, that have removed the necessity to pay for gas for easier user onboarding. So there's a lot of kind of built-in customizability when it comes to app chains that is not as easy to do in a shared EVM environment. This in turn can lead to a superior UX because you can kind of vertically integrate the entire stack of the app chain. So there's other examples here. Osmosis on Cosmos is a good example, right? They're building a DEX-specific chain on Cosmos, and they've made a bunch of modifications to the chain itself to make it easier for users, right? They have built-in wallet and bridge functionalities. They offer native liquid staking. You can pay for gas in any token that's supported by the DEX. So all these things ultimately make the protocol more competitive because the user experience is just superior. And then there's this point on decentralization and token utility, right? There's a good example here around DYDX, who went from Ethereum mainnet to Starkware, and ultimately they decided to build a Cosmos app chain because they weren't comfortable with the centralization that L2s have to offer, right? And they wanted to have more sovereignty and their own governance mechanism. So all these things kind of contribute towards like this growth that developers we're seeing with developers building app chains. But yeah, as with anything, app chain implementations have trade-offs, right? And there's significant challenges. Arguably, the most significant challenge when building an app chain is this idea of, or this concept of infrastructure, right? That when you build on something like Moonbeam, you have all this great tooling already readily available. You have block explorers, you have oracles, RPC endpoints, indexers. But when you build your own app chain, you're really taking on the responsibility of putting all those things in place. And it really takes, and I went through this myself, right? When building out Moonbeam, it takes a tremendous a tremendous amount of time and energy to put all those things in place. So it's really not very trivial. Then there's this point around security, right? Many app chains out there, outside of the Polkadot ecosystem in particular, they have non-ideal security. Many app chains have as little as 5 validators, which is really not good for security. And there's also this point on inefficiency, right? Where when you're starting and bootstrapping a chain, you have to pay for like a full validator set worth of security, right? And if you haven't achieved product market fit, there's kind of this opportunity cost that you might be overpaying the validators because the blocks might be close to empty, right? So there's this capital inefficiency point where you could be using those resources elsewhere. Then the third one is pretty self-explanatory, right? When you're building an app chain, it's not you lose the composability of an EVM environment, right? So you need to establish cross-chain and bridge connections, which obviously Polkadot is great at through XCM, but not all ecosystems have these like native composability languages built into them. And then last but not least, which is very related to the first point, is just the time to market, right? Putting all of these things into place ultimately means that it's going to take you months to potentially years to launch your own app chain. And I think these are all points that ultimately, it's a deterrent, right? Developers want to do what's most seamless, what's most frictionless. So all of these things kind of are holding back the app chain space from even more exponential growth. So yeah, introducing Tansi. Tansi is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a parachain on Polkadot that is really meant to address all of those challenges that I mentioned. It's kind of a chain to launch other chains. And the mental model around Tansi is that we want to build a protocol that will retain the benefits of having an app chain that we just discussed, combined with the ease of deployment of a smart contract. And we're going to be providing services such as block production, data retrievability and consensus, interoperability and cross-chain communication through XCM, and then a bunch of chain management tools to just make it easier to manage your own chain. Above all else, I would say that Tansi is really a protocol meant to dramatically reduce the time to market to deploy a chain at a fraction of the cost of what's currently available, without compromising on principles of security and decentralization, which are important to us. You can think of Tansi kind of like as a Kubernetes for Web3, where it's going to be kind of providing an orchestration protocol and services to run app chains in a reliable and secure environment. And I know it's a little bit difficult to understand. I think this slide usually helps. So here you can kind of see what the architecture looks like. Tansi, as I mentioned, itself will be a parachain, just like Moonbeam or Interlay or Hydra. But the only purpose of the Tansi parachain will be to provide infrastructure services. So the collators of Tansi are actually going to produce blocks on behalf of these app chains. In this slide, you can see them as container chains. Container chains, app chains, it's kind of different terminology. We're using container chains because it's kind of similar to Docker containers in Web 2 that are being orchestrated by something like Kubernetes. But essentially, they're parachains, right, that are attached to the relay chain. So Tansi's collators are shared. They kind of come in from the side and help produce blocks on behalf of these app chains. And then there's going to be a second type of node called data preservers or data retrievers that are essentially in charge of keeping track of the state of each of these app chains so that the state transitions can be executed properly by the collators. And we're going to be supporting both parachains and pay-as-you-go parachains as soon as those are shipped. But this kind of gives you an idea of what this looks like. These app chains aren't going to be built on top of Tansi. They are like themselves kind of connected to the relay chain, right? And they're going to have connectivity to XCM and all those things that parachains can benefit from. Here we try to summarize, what the main responsibilities are for developers when they want to, what responsibilities they incur when they want to build an app chain. At the highest level, you have the logic of the chain itself or the application layer. In Substrate, this is the runtime, right? But then you have, as we just discussed, like these other responsibilities, right? You have all the security components, settlement, availability, execution, which are going to be provided by the Tansi parachain and the relay chain of Polkadot. And then you have the key integrations, the bridges, the explorers, the wallets, the RPC endpoints, all of which add to like the time to market. The idea is that we're going to be working with a lot of the main providers on Polkadot to standardize and automate those integration processes so that, for example, a developer would go to our UI, they would pick the tools that they want, and when they launch the app chain, they would have kind of those integrations already kind of pre-built into the chain itself, so they don't have to go out and negotiate with the providers, and it just saves them time. Ultimately, the only responsibility that would fall on the dev when deploying through Tansi is the runtime itself, so they'll be able to customize their own runtime with the palettes they want. And if they don't want to, we're planning to provide these pre-compiled templates so that they can launch their own runtime in one click, right? One template that is quite popular so far is the EVM template. So developers will essentially be able to launch their own EVM environment or their own EVM parachain in just a couple of clicks. And then we're going to be providing a bunch of self-service tooling. It's really important for us that Tansi is a permissionless protocol, right? And we're going to get into why in the next slides. But it will be fully permissionless, so teams won't necessarily have to interact with our team if they want to deploy an app chain. Yeah, in this slide, you can kind of see the current Tansi ecosystem. Right now, we're working towards a testnet, but we've kind of secured a bunch of collaborations so far. And it's quite exciting to see the use cases, right? We have Kawa, for example, which is a native cross-chain lending protocol. They want to have a .sama-specific strategy, so they're going to be launching an app chain through Tansi. You have Remark, which a lot of people in this room know. Bruno is very hot on the idea of creating customized governance mechanisms based on NFTs, based on reputation, so that the activities you do on-chain kind of evolve over time, and that's what gives you weight during governance and not kind of how many tokens you have. All these things are customizations that would otherwise be very difficult to do in just a standard EVM environment. We have Galaxia Studios, which is a gaming studio that are going to be launching a series of games as app chains. We're seeing that gaming is a great use case for application-specific chains. And they're big believers in fully on-chain games, right? So with fully on-chain games, it becomes a challenge to share block space with other teams in an EVM. So app chains make a lot of sense. And yeah, I won't get into all of them, but we're basically seeing use cases ranging from DeFi, NFTs, gaming. So I think we're already seeing significant traction leading up to testnet, which I think will ultimately translate into more adoption in the Polkadot ecosystem. And then apart from the container chains, you can see kind of all the block explorers, the indexers, oracles, wallets, and RPC endpoints that we're working with to automate those integrations within kind of the Tansi developer experience. Yeah, talking a little bit about the competitive landscape and what I was mentioning before about Tansi being a permissionless protocol is relevant for this one, right? So I've given a lot of thought to the competition out there, and I wouldn't obviously call Polkadot competition. It's just a different option if you want to launch a parachain yourself. But yeah, Polkadot and Cosmos are obviously the OGs within this space. What we've seen, and from having spoken to many builders, there's still like a substantial amount of setup time and effort required when bootstrapping a Cosmos chain or a Polkadot chain. Obviously, the main difference is the shared security model that Polkadot has versus Cosmos, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of infrastructural complexity associated with building chains in these ecosystems. Then there's these new players, right? There's Avalanche subnets, Polygon supernets, the Op Superstack and Arbitrum, these L3s that are kind of like app-specific roll-ups on mainnet. With Avalanche, I would say that the security is not the same as Polkadot. So bootstrapping a diversified validator set is quite expensive, which is, I think, why subnets end up having as little as 5 validators, which is really not great for security. They also don't have XCM, right? They have their own version of it called warp messaging, but they're not inheriting security from something like the relay chain. When you connect two subnets, you're kind of inheriting the security of the weaker subnet. So I think it's inferior to what Polkadot has to offer in terms of shared security, where everyone is kind of plugging into the relay chain. Then there's Polygon supernets, which are, this is kind of like a permission model, right? You kind of have to apply on the Polygon website. They onboard you as a team, then they kind of in the background, they're recruiting all these infrastructure components on your behalf, but it's all manual and like off-chain labor, right? Which always like drives up the cost and the time to market. So it costs several $100,000 and approximately like 4 to 6 months to launch. And the Op stack, I think this is quite popular because they have kind of the weight of Ethereum mainnet behind them. It's fairly easy to launch. The issue I see with rollups is that they're highly centralized. They don't share the same composability as something like XCM. And the degree of customization isn't as near to Substrate and the Cosmos SDK, right? So there's a lot of inherent trade-offs with all these options. With Tansi, what we want to build is a fully permissionless and automated protocol, right? This is why it has to be a parachain. And by making it permissionless, it makes it a lot more cost efficient because it offers, this is why I love Polkadot, because it offers this cloud-like experience where you can leverage the shared validation services of the relay chain. You can benefit from the shared block production services of Tansi. And this not only makes it a lot more efficient in terms of time to market, but it also makes it a lot more cost efficient. So I think this Tansi is really going to kind of pave the way in this transition from like running your own infrastructure to a more cloud-like experience within Web3. And also, I'm not really seeing, another point I'd make is that from what I'm seeing, is an app chain deployment doesn't necessarily mean that it's mutually exclusive to a smart contract deployment, right? With a lot of teams, what I'm starting to see is that many teams are going to want to service users on Ethereum mainnet or Arbitrum or Optimism, wherever the liquidity and users are, but they can still leverage having an app chain and getting those benefits. It's kind of this analogy of the factory doesn't necessarily have to be where the users are, right? You can meet those users in these places and kind of have this app chain focused backend where you can have your own token, you can have all the benefits that we discussed about. Yeah, in terms of the .sama ecosystem, I think from experience and having participated and contributed to Moonbeam, I think the Polkadot ecosystem, the technology is extremely advanced, right? If you kind of check the competitive landscape, everything is kind of converging towards the architecture that Polkadot already has. The shared security model, Cosmos is doing interchain security, there's EigenLayer on Ethereum, XCM, IBC. A lot of people are kind of going towards this model. I think what we can do better on Polkadot is just improving the developer experience, right? And making it drastically easier to launch a chain. And being able to launch a chain in a matter of hours instead of months, I think will be a game changer for our ecosystem. Combined with things like developer relations support, more documentation, and initiatives to kind of incentivize builders within the Polkadot ecosystem. Yeah, I think this is relatively repetitive from what was discussed before. Here you can kind of see the team that's responsible for building Tansi. Myself, Gorka, who was previously leading XCM initiatives on Moonbeam. So he's quite an expert in all substrate-related matters. Kathy, who's leading marketing. She was previously head of community at Moonbeam. And then Tiago, who's in the crowd today, who's going to be leading growth initiatives for Tansi as well. Yeah, this is actually, we're using this opportunity of presenting at Polkadot Decoded to announce the Tansi Ambassador Program as well. It was launched today or in the last days. So yeah, this is going to be a great opportunity for everyone out there to start engaging with Tansi if they want to participate in initiatives like content creation, if they want to contribute from a technical perspective, making tutorials, building communities, setting up events or communities specific to your kind of region in the world. I would encourage everyone to kind of participate in the Tansi Ambassador Program to start building the community. And yeah, I think this is pretty much it. Thanks a lot for the time today. I think just as closing words, I do feel like a very strong sense of urgency for us to ship Tansi as quickly as possible, because while Polkadot is ahead in terms of from a technology standpoint, competitors are moving fast, right? So I do feel like we have a responsibility to accelerate adoption on Polkadot as quickly as possible to make Polkadot and Tansi the most utilized Web3 infrastructure in the space today, and I deeply believe that we can get there. But yeah, thanks a lot for your time, everyone. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Very, very interesting. Super excited about Tansi. I think it was one of your first presentations.
Yeah,
introducing
live
presentation. So very first-hand content for you guys. I think we have time for one question. If you would like to take a question from the audience.
Yeah. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah. Here. You asked the question before. Maybe here.
Hi, thank you. Just wanted to know, you obviously are providing a service for other parachains. How, in terms of the business model, how is that going to work, and how are you planning to monetize your services?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we plan on releasing a token, a Tansi token, and that's essential to be able to kind of incentivize a lot of the permissionless services that will be provided. So the Tansi token, we're thinking of two different models at this point. One is a staking for access model, or a burn and mint equilibrium model, where you're essentially going to have to use the Tansi token, either stake it or burn it. It hasn't been fully decided yet. And then based on how much you stake or burn, that's going to give you kind of a predetermined amount of of usage within the network. And then part of the token economics of Tansi will be designed to incentivize the block producers, right? The collators, the data retrieval nodes. So a portion of the yearly inflation on Tansi, at least in the first years, will be used to incentivize these types of node runnings. So yeah, that's kind of how we're thinking about it at a high level. And then obviously incurring usage within the Tansi network will lead to fees, and the treasury will take part of those fees that will then be used for different initiatives within the community.
Yeah, I think time is up for
Okay,
you.
cool. Yeah,
but you're around, right? I think everyone in the beautiful turquoise T-shirt,
thanks,
people can talk.
Yeah, thanks
to the
everyone.
team. Thank you so much.